Hi, we're going to talk about the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And again, a lot of people think that this is talking in Matthew chapter 24, verse 29, about Jesus coming in the clouds for the church when the rapture takes place, or the resurrection. I prefer to say resurrection. Rapture's not in the Bible, but there is a resurrection coming. It hasn't happened yet. But is Matthew 24 and 29 talking about that? Now, we already spoke last time about how that there was going to be the destruction of Jerusalem. And the disciples asked Jesus, and I wanted to show this. I said that when it talks about the wherever the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. And let me show you that on the screen here. And I showed you and explained that a lot of versions of the Bible say vultures. Well, they asked Jesus what would happen. What would be the sign of his coming? And the sign was preceded by many other signs, the beginnings of sorrows. The end wasn't coming yet. The end would come when Jerusalem would be surrounded by armies, and they had to get out of there. That wasn't talking about the rapture of the church. That wasn't saying just before the rapture of the church, you're going to have to run out of Jerusalem and go to the hills in Judea. Why would you have to run anywhere if the rapture is going to take place? You just stay put. You're going to be taken up and caught out of there. So then he said it would be like lightning. Like lightning comes out of the east and shines unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. It's not a secret rapture. There is no secret rapture. As though, poof, people are going to be gone and everyone's going to be looking around saying, where are they? And you'll see clothes left there as though they didn't need their clothes. They're going to be robed in white robes. And I believe we're going to be caught up. And I believe in a physical catching up, by the way. I do not believe that the rapture or the resurrection is when we personally die individually and then a spirit body comes out of our physical bodies. According to 1 Corinthians 15, it's a physical body that's going to be changed from being mortal to immortal, just like Jesus' physical body was changed in the tomb when he resurrected to have an immortal body. And Romans chapter 6 tells us that death has no more power over him because he resurrected. And it's because he resurrected, death has no more power over him. But anyway, it talks about a lightning type coming of Jesus. That's not a secret coming. Lightning. It's very visible. It's climactic. But when it says wheresoever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together, the contemporary English version says, where there is a corpse, there will always be buzzards. That's not talking about the rapture. And the International Standard Version says, where there's a corpse, there the vultures will gather. So it's talking about death and destruction, being taken away. And we showed you that in Luke chapter 17, wherever the body is, there will the eagles be gathered together. And again, in the International Standard Version, wherever there's a corpse, there the vultures will gather. In the Contemporary English Version, where there's a corpse, there will always be buzzards. And then we go to Matthew chapter 24, verse 29, and let's read it again from King James. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now let's go verse by verse. A lot of people will say, well, Jesus hasn't come yet because look outside. Do you see the sun? Do you see the moon? And do you see the stars? Well, just go out there and see if the sun and stars and moon are still shining, and you'll know that the Lord has not come. They failed to recognize. Had they known their Bibles better, they wouldn't have done this. That this reference of the sun, moon, and stars and constellations ceasing to shine is not a literal reference. It's symbolic language that the Old Testament used in several places. It's talking about lights out for a kingdom. Let me show you examples of that. In Isaiah chapter 13, It's talking about the burden of Babylon, as you can see in the first verse. He says in verse 10, "For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth. The moon shall not cause her light to shine. And I will punish the world for their evil and the wicked for their iniquity." And it's talking about Babylon's destruction. It's talking about the end of Babylon's kingdom. And that happens thousands of years ago. So, can you still see the sun out there shining? Are there still constellations? Are there still stars shining? Of course. But that day said that there would be no shining of the sun and the stars and so forth. So there you know it's speaking about biblical imagery, using biblical imagery to get across a point. Adam Clarke, well-known theologian, made the statement that the sun is the religion of the church. The moon is the government of the state, and the stars are the judges and doctors of both. And you can see that. So what he's talking about is Jerusalem, the congregation, which is actually church, its sun and its moon, the secular government, and the religious political system. It would all come to an end. The lights would go out. And that's so important for us to understand. It's changing the governments and the rulers in the earth. Dealing with the change here from law to grace. So he's going to turn the lights out of old Jerusalem and deal with the change of covenants from law to grace, from Old Testament to New Testament. His church is now the light of the world. God said in Genesis chapter 1, and let's go to verse 16, "And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. And he said, they were made to give light upon the earth, and they were made to rule." So light and rulership or dominion. Remember, Joseph had a dream. The sun, moon, and stars were bowing to him. Now, was that dream going to be fulfilled by the literal sun, moon, and stars bowing down to a human being? That cannot happen. That's impossible. But it's talking about the earthly leadership would bow down to Joseph. Egypt was where Joseph was found later, rose up in power, and just handled the whole issue about the famine that was coming, and Pharaoh gave him a lot of authority. And so when Israel and the sons of Israel, the tribal patriarchs, bowed down to Joseph, that was representing the sun and the moon and the stars and so forth. Now let's see another example. Ezekiel 32, verses 7 and 8. "And when I will put thee out, I will cover the heaven and make the stars thereof dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. And all the bright lights of heaven will I make dark over thee, and set darkness upon thy land, saith the Lord." This was a prophecy of the destruction of Egypt. He says in verse 2, "Take up a lamentation for Pharaoh, king of Egypt." Now, did the lights stop shining? Go outside. Can you still see the sun and the stars and so forth? The very argument that futurists who don't understand biblical imagery will propose when you show them that Matthew 24 and 29 was already fulfilled. They don't realize that Jesus was using biblical imagery. In Isaiah chapter 34, we see the same thing again. And if you look in verse 4, this is about Bozrah and Idumea. "All the hosts of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together as a scroll, and all their hosts shall fall down as leaf falleth out from the vine, and as a falling fig from the tree." And by the way, if you keep reading, God's sword is going to be bathed in heaven. Now, does that mean there's a literal sword that's going to take a bath in heaven, as though heaven was the bath water? "And it would come down upon Idumea and the people of my curse, the judgment. The Lord, the sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness and with the blood of lambs and goats." Does that mean the sword has a mouth and it's going to actually eat goats, and it's going to eat the kidneys of lambs and the blood of goats and make it have a belly that gets fat? You see, this is all biblical imagery. It's part and parcel with the sun and the moon and the stars going out and not shining. And it's not referring to nuclear war. We've been told that it's nuclear war. People are being literal and they miss the prophetic language of symbolism. There was no nuclear war when the Bible was written, obviously, and it wasn't talking about that. They'll say yes, but it was foretelling that, and it's the best way that the prophets could describe something they weren't aware of. But no, don't bring in those hoops. It's just God using another nation's army to defeat these nations that he spoke about. It's the same language you find in Revelation chapter 6 when God pours his wrath on Jerusalem using the heathen Roman army. Let's go there to Revelation chapter 6 and read verses 13 and 14. And as the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she's shaken of a mighty wind, and the heaven departed as a scroll, when it's rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. It's not a nuclear war. It's the destruction of Jerusalem using symbolic language by the Roman army. Look in verse 15. The kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the chief captains, the mighty men and every bondman, every freeman hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. And if you keep reading, it says, they said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. Now, Jesus said that very thing and told women that were actually weeping for him that it was going to happen to them and their children in their day. Look at this. Luke chapter 23 and verse 28. But Jesus turning and said, daughters of Jerusalem, this is when he was carrying his cross, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Remember, Jesus kept on saying, this generation shall not pass. This generation, behold, I say unto you, you shall hear the people alive at the time and their children. It says it right here. Behold, the days are coming in the which they shall say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bear and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills cover us. That is the sixth seal of Revelation chapter 6. And Jesus himself is using that terminology to help us allow the Bible to interpret itself and let us know the time frame when these six seals would take place. Folks, I don't know about you, but I'm going to listen to Jesus when he refers to these seals, and I'm going to take his word about who that's going to happen to and when it's going to happen, rather than a lot of these modern day ministers and preachers. So it happened at the time of about AD 67 to 70, the destruction of Jerusalem. The daughters would cry out that they wished they'd never had children. It was so devastating that the Bible actually foretold mothers would devour their own children. They literally had to eat their babies to survive. And I know that's not great to hear about, but the history actually recounts this. Josephus talks about a soldier walking into a Hebrew home, and then the mother was gone out of her mind by this point, and her brain had snapped, and she had roasted her child and turned around and asked the soldier if he wanted some. And this was all prophesied in Deuteronomy, way back in the Old Testament, chapter 28, and you read this in verse 53. Thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee in the siege. This is exactly what happened when Jerusalem was destroyed. They were besieged or surrounded by armies so that they couldn't get out or in, and they were starved out. And in the straitness wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. And then you go to Leviticus chapter 26, and again you see the same ugly picture. In verse 29, and you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall you eat. Even their enemies would be distressed. How could God accomplish this? If you read the preceding verses before that, Deuteronomy 28, verses 49 or rather 49 and 50. Let me go back. Before you read verse 53 about eating the flesh, go back to 49 and 50. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. And there's a hint right there, quite loud, about the eagle being the Roman symbol. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And it was talking to Israel. The law is written to them that are under the law, the book of Romans tells us. He's not going to use the judgments of law upon nations that don't even serve him. He's going to use it to the people that were under that covenant and were told, if you disobey my word, break my law, I'm going to use these specific judgments against you. The sinners of the world didn't have the law to break to begin with. This is why over and over again it's pointing to Israel. It's pointing to Jerusalem. It's pointing to that first century day when they broke the law in the biggest way they could imaginable, rejecting Jesus, to whom the law was a schoolmaster to lead them.